Happy New Year and congrats on another year of survival. Hopefully you had a good time with close friends and family, because I sure didn't. But that's alright. You're in the same boat. We can be sad and empty together. And speaking of sad and empty, those latest Pokemon games, am I right? Alright, well, to be fair, Scarlet and Violet kinda had some signs of life in them, but that's pretty helpful when the previous gen had set the bar so abysmally low with Sword and Shield that, I mean, anything at this point is kind of just better. But it's been rough being a fan of the series, especially as long as I have for like 20 plus years. So I kind of just wanted to make this video and maybe go a bit down memory lane and potentially see where we can kind of pinpoint the problem. And yeah, let's talk about it. Now for me personally, I don't know if my journey started at the end of 1999 or 2000. It's probably a lot more likely I started playing Pokemon at the end of the year 2000. But anyway, my brother received a copy of Red and Silver version for his birthday by his godparents. They happened to just drop off the present at our house, and my brother took one good look at the games. And since he was an avid fan of sports games, actually still is, that's pretty much all he plays. He took one good look at these box arts and then just chucked them at my 4-year-old head. Which, I mean, to be fair, I'll say he allegedly had malicious intent. But maybe he knew I was human garbage from the start and mistook me for the trash can, so I don't blame him for that. But anyway, after about 10 minutes or so of crying, I took one good look at Red version, saw this cool dragon, not dragon lizard thing, and just immediately fell in love. So the moment he put his Game Boy down, I just swiped that bad boy, plugged it in, and chose Charmander and began my journey from there. And it was just magic. And these games were like Adderall to kid me. I would spend so many countless hours just grinding in the same small patches of grass in the first couple routes. And it was so bad to the point where I had a Charizard before battling Misty. And I eventually just swept through the whole game by using this tactic. I wouldn't even use HMs unless they were absolutely necessary. So I got to the point where Rock Tunnel, you know, that tunnel that leads to Lavender Town, you know, you don't really need flash, but it definitely helps. I memorized that thing in the dark like the back of my hand. It was crazy. Just in general, these games had so much to explore, even in the towns, like a massive department store and gambling the casino in Celadon, to optional gyms and houses with memorable NPCs like Mr. Psychic and Saffron, to even the Safari Zone to find some random dude's dentures for an HM in Fuchsia City. And there were the additional areas and routes and towns that were blocked off until you got access to them, like the museum backdoor entrance in Pewter that was inaccessible until you had cut, or actually speaking of Rock Tunnel, that, you know, patch of water area that kind of leads further south to the power plant that you couldn't traverse until you got surf. And it was, you know, frustrating for me as a kid at first encountering these kinds of obstacles, but then it was incredibly rewarding once you figured out the mechanics after obtaining the HMs. Like, just, it blew my mind as a kid, like how close I was to Zapdos, one of the legendary birds, in that power plant so early on in the game, and I just needed something that didn't unlock until later. Like, it's such a cool way to get people invested in your world and backtracking a bit in these optional areas, but then getting greatly rewarded for it. After about a year of exclusively playing Red version, I decided to jump on the other copy that my brother received and played the Silver version for the first time. And oh my god, was my little mind absolutely blown to see Pokemans, but in color. And it did introduce the best Pokemon to ever grace the series, my boy Houndoom. Like, come on, how could you not love this thing? It's mostly because it's a dog. I really love dogs. Here's mine. But anyway, Gen 2, objectively, not great in this series, though it is my personal favorite, and I'll admit that is completely because of bias, and it has many flaws. But exploration is damn near not one of them. Just so many countless hours spent in the Burnt and Bell Tower in Ecruteak, in the deep caverns of the World Islands, thanks to my newly found ability to read at this point in my life, talking to an NPC to discover that there's a cool rare Pokemon that you can explore in the deeper areas of Union Cave, And then the Dark Cave area that starts like in the one of the first early game routes that interconnects several locations, even to the last city way at the end of the game. Freaking random ass Mount Mortar on the way to Mahogany Town, where you could traverse and then meet a familiar NPC from the last gen to obtain Pyrogue, one of the new Pokemon in this game. And, you know, of course, Mount Silver, which, you know, it has its share of problems, but in terms of like navigation and all the interconnected areas within it, it's such a blast to explore and venture through. It even leads to one of the most iconic battles in the whole series. Like there's just so much to explore that they did so much right in terms of world building, that so much content in just this one gen. Then came in Gen 3, which really raised the bar with their methods of travel and environments, like the cable car that takes you up to Mount Chimney, or an entire goddamn city that can only be first accessed by going underwater. In the new Malvale power plant, that was this massive subterranean city with 69 floors. Meme number? No, that's actually the floor count. That was then repurposed into a power plant. To the abandoned ship on Route 108, which, you know, memes aside, you know, haha, game had too much water. I kind of wish they did have more of these little sub areas to explore. Maybe more abandoned ships, like some underwater, that there was like a little more use for dive. But still, it was still really cool to explore all these areas. And then, you know, the Mirage Tower in the desert, where you could claim a fossil, then, you know, it would crumble before you could claim the other one, which, you know, honestly, you could have probably grabbed both, but, you know, I digress. To the secret bases, which I don't know if you could really count, but I do. There are these little cool spots that you could find throughout the world and, like, you know, make your own little man cave. And then, you know, the trick house on Route 110, where the outside was always the same, but upon entering, you would be greeted with a new layout and puzzle depending on the gym you just completed, up to 8 different designs. And of course, we have to mention the absolute asinine levels of conspiracy nonsense that was Mirage Island and Reggie hunting. After having my trust broken with the fake rumors of Mew under the truck and such, how was I supposed to trust that there was a random chance that a magical island would appear once a day, depending on the personality value of a random Pokemon in my party? Not to mention the Da Vinci Code levels of bullshit that was the Reggie hunt. Without a guide, how the hell was I ever supposed to know that I needed 2 very specific Pokemon in an exact layout in my team, in a very specific location, while doing the Krabby Patty secret formula ritual from SpongeBob? Like, holy crap. I remember being at the middle school lunch table because my friends were explaining this process to me, and like, they had me intervention style because I refused to believe Braille was an actual language. And like, you know, as convoluted and crazy as the Reggie hunting was in this gen, honestly, I still loved it, and I kind of miss it. Like, I wonder why they never did something like this again. Maybe it was, you know, too difficult. But I mean, they could have just released a guide like they did before. But still, it adds to the uniqueness of Gen 3, so I can see why they wouldn't do it again. But come on, one last time. I would love to see it in a modern gen, and just don't even make the guide this time. Just, you know, throw people to the wolves and just let somebody figure it out like 2 years later. That'd be fucking hilarious. Next came Diamond and Pearl, that brought incredible realism to the series by making their abysmal surf speeds take multiple real-life days to get from one area to another. Though, I mean, joking aside, this was fixed in Platinum, and they had some pretty cool side areas to explore in the water, like from Route 205 to Fuego Ironworks. And, you know, the snow effects, it was the first time snow was introduced to the series, actually, and to a young East Los Angeles, California boy like myself, the games did a great job at letting me know how absolutely bullshit snow can be, even though I've never seen it before. Just the annoyingly high levels of stuff that are like waist high on Route 217 on the way to Snow Point, just slowing you down exponentially, still haunts me to this day. Though as annoying as that was, I would definitely take it over the really annoying swamp areas near Pastoria City. I think there was even some in the Great Marsh where just every other step you would just get stuck, and it's, oh my god, it was so frustrating. But like, as annoying as these areas were, it was nice seeing such diversity and environments being represented. And I think it's the most versatile in terms of environments we've seen, like in the series overall. I don't think we've had, all these kind of different areas since. And then there's the Piece de Resistance. I have no idea if I pronounced that right, but I fucking hate French, so I'm not going to redo that. It was Mount Coronet, which runs right through the center of the entire world and just had so many twists and turns to it that you could just easily get lost. But personally, I have navigated this area so many times, and I know I did because you could, for the life of me, not get directions on any street I've ever grown up on. Like, it could be decades, and I would not know how the hell to tell you to get to my house. But I have navigated the Spear Pillar so many times that if you needed directions to it, just call me Ferdinand Magellan, because I got you. And the sub areas, like so many near major cities, like Iron Island, Snow Point Temple, the old Chateau, and the Safari Zone, just to name a few. But I think I'm going to focus more on my favorite one, and which I think it is like the best representation and way to introduce like the third legendary in a trio. I think they kind of started that in Gen 3 with Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza. But that whole trio pattern, Giratina's by far was the best. Specifically talking about Diamond and Pearl. Like Platinum's was great too. I love Distortion World, but Turnback Cave is just the pinnacle of exploring these new areas without really knowing about them and being rewarded with a really cool legendary that's kind of repeated a few times, but as of recent has just been abandoned. Now I'm sure the game kind of gave you some hint or straight up told you that this area became accessible after the Elite Four. I'm not really sure. I could have confirmed it and did a little bit of research. Fuck that. But at the time, I didn't really read much. I just wanted to play the game, so I kind of just spammed through like cutscenes and stuff. So I was like gaslighting the shit out of myself, thinking like, how the hell did I miss this area south of Veilstone, even though it wasn't available till after the Elite Four. But after just arguing with myself, I decided to go in through the Send-Off Spring, and then immediately was just entranced with this place. Even though it's a very simple layout, it's just a room with multiple doors. There's the concept of realizing like, oh shit, I can't escape. Like no escape roping, no digging, no nothing. You just solve this mystery or you fucking die. Or black out in this case. I don't know if I should be ashamed about it, but for me personally, it took me about half an hour to an hour my first playthrough to finally get to the main room with Giratina. But when I asked so many of my friends, they got it done like no time flat. So I don't know if I was just stupid or what, but eventually I made my way to the main chamber and I was greeted with possibly one of, if not the best designed Pokemon of all time, my main man's Giratina. Like, just look at this. Look at it. It's huge. Look, it's so good. Especially with the Grisius Orb. My God. Anyway, but just this whole concept of just being thrown and giving new side content and just a whole new area. No real clues or hints or anything of the sort. Just even no warning. Just bam. Here, explore this thing. You figure it out. And congrats, here's a beast of a legendary you can attempt to catch. And that is something, again, like I stated before, they do a couple more times throughout the series, but it's been, just missing for so long. And I really hope they bring this back at some point. But I'm just, kind of tired of the whole just go to a random GameStop and get a code and then here's your legendary. That's it. It just costs you some gas or time. You live like right next to one, I guess. I don't know. Just kind of wish there's a little more effort in the worlds. And just when you thought Pokemon couldn't reach new heights, the madmen at Game Freak fucking did it again, and they released the pinnacle of the series. Just no debate. Just Gen 5, man. Oh my God, it's so good, and it was so taken for granted. But I think kind of the starting point into just lower effort in games. So we'll get to that. But for now, I hope you like your bridges. Because, oh my God, this game had you covered with some of the most beautiful bridge designs I've ever seen, and nothing has even come close since. I mean, talking about, your Tube-Line bridge, your Driftveil bridge, the Marvelous bridge, the homey feel of the Village bridge, the stunning underwater bridge with the marine tube. Don't know if that one really counts. I'm counting it. Screw you. I don't know. Then arguably the best of them all, Sky Arrow bridge. Now, this was the first gen I really started shiny hunting. So you bet your ass most of my playtime was spent on Sky Arrow Bridge, just going back and forth, hatching eggs. Like, honestly, if you took my play hours, I can guarantee you at least 70% of those was on Sky Arrow Bridge. You know, if the side areas that are connecting major cities had this much love and effort put into them, the entire world is going to be damn good. And Gen 5 took Gen 3 to school and showed them how the hell an underwater area should be done with the abyssal ruins. Just the sheer mystery of potentially finding a really cool Pokemon or just other kind of discoveries just filled me with so much just wonder. I explored it so many times just in case I somehow missed a single nook or cranny because I didn't want to miss out on anything of this place. And sure, you know, there wasn't a cool Pokemon down there. It would have been nice if they did add one, but the money you made from it was pretty nice too. And well, if you want hidden areas with some cool Pokemon in them, look no further than the Swords of Justice. And much like the power plant of Gen 1, the Turnback Cave gave me similar vibes because it was yet another optional area that was cut off until you get access to Surf. And I don't know, I guess I'm just a sucker for really cool caves that give you a sick-ass legendary once you finish navigating them. But hey, here we are. Cobalion is just also a really well-designed Pokemon, and you know, just the exploration aspect just gets me like wanting to explore the world even more. And they did such a good job with like how they blocked off Virizion and Terrakion. They didn't really block them in terms of getting access to an HM later. They were just closed off until you caught the first one, Cobalion, which I think is a really nice way to show how like, you know, cool and, you know, trusted these legendaries were within each other as a trio. Of course, their methods of obtainment change in the sequel games of Black and White too, but overall, there's just not enough time to talk about this generation as a whole. It's probably going to be something I produce later on, because, I mean, Gen 5 deserves it. There's just so much effort, especially with the sequel game. Like, if there was a gen you could give a critique of having too much content and too many areas to explore, this is the one. And the sequels do something not really any other sequel has done, or has done since or before, and just take the map and just spin it on its head, because you start with a completely different starting area compared to, you know, Black and White. And how could I not mention Castalia City, one of the largest cities ever designed, with so many places and sub areas to explore and people to talk to and things to navigate. Just as perfect of a city in Pokemon as you could ask for. And then all the cave options like Wellspring Cave and Clay Tunnel, the Twist Mountain, Victory Road, Chargestone Cave, all unique with their own environments and interactions. And it still feels like I haven't even touched the surface of areas within these games, which I promise I'm going to make a more in-depth video on that. But I just can't do it justice with this short amount of time. But now, unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, as we must now talk about and discuss the decline of Pokemon and the unfortunate transition into the 3D era. Now, to me, X and Y is one of, if not the weakest gen of Pokemon, but honestly, exploration really isn't one of the reasons for it, because personally, I believe in Reflection Cave supremacy. It was a nice touch having trainers like their backs against the wall and be able to see you with the reflection, but what really intrigued me about this area was the little platforms that had like items on them, and it seemed at first glance they just weren't be able to get navigated on, but then at certain angles, against the wall, it'll reveal like a staircase, and it turns out, hey, you actually can, you just gotta go at this certain angle to it. And that concept is really cool. The Lost Hotel was a pretty cool area that kind of sits underground on Route 15, and it honestly had one of my favorite uses of Rock Smash, where you can just tear down these old walls and get some goodies for it. And overall, just a really well-designed spot that adds some great content in between routes. And then the Kalos Power Plant, which, you know, looked awesome on the surface, but once you go inside, you kind of realize there's nothing really going on with it. Like, there's just two, you know, doorways as you go in, one that leads to a cramped room full of NPCs that don't really do anything for you, and the other one that's just kind of there for Team Flare plot, but it's just a big area with like a circle path and no items or no Pokemon to, you know, obtain or encounter. It's like, it just felt like they had big plans for it, and maybe they just had to scrap it for time, or, you know, something happened, but it had the potential to be so much more. And I feel like this is just a theme that kind of slowly snowballs out of control the entirety of the 3D era as we go along. Glittering Cave wasn't the most groundbreaking in terms of its pathing, but aesthetically it was very nice, and the whole third-person dungeon crawler feel really made the layout work for itself. Then we have the final beacon of legendary hunting that isn't really seen since, and with Zygarde and Terminus Cave, much like the Reggie hunting and Mistralton Cave and Turnback Cave, World Islands and Cerulean Cave. This whole method of discovery of a new Pokemon in a new unique area is just gone. And it's sad because it's one of my favorite ways to explore and find new unique Pokemon as well as explore the world in itself. And there's Parfum Palace, very much like a game of League of Legends. Fun to look at, but a terrible experience to play through. Like, the mazes were okay and there were some decent items, but overall it feels like much like the power plant. There was more planned for this and they just had to scrap it, or maybe they didn't and they just kind of meant for it to be as bland as it was. But to be fair, the fireworks show at the end of it, like the first time you visit, almost makes up for it entirely. Like, it's fucking gorgeous and still one of the best cutscenes in the entire series. And then there's the hub city of this place, Lumio City, where camera angles go to fucking die. Don't even think about rollerblading, or you're just not gonna have a good time with it. I honestly don't remember if they fixed that afterwards, or my first time playing through it. Like I said, I don't know if I mentioned, but I only played X once. And that was my first real memory with it. Just how god awful it was to navigate with the rollerblades. But other than that, there were some pretty cool shops and a little bit of side content to do. Not really to the extent of Castalia, but an attempt was made and it was pretty neat. And now we move on to quantity over quality, the video games. With 4 unique maps based on one of the most beautiful regions in the world with such vibrant and colorful landscapes. How the hell could your world design go so wrong? Pretty fucking easy, apparently. I mean, I've played through Gen 7 at 5 times, and I can't for the life of me remember much about the world design of itself. And I mean, I tried for a 6th time, but for the first time in my life, I've actually started loving myself a bit, so I couldn't put myself through that, so I apologize. I did, however, rewatch some gameplay of this gen, and honestly, I think one of the main reasons this world was so forgetful has a lot to do with the routes. All the older games put so much effort into the side content, and these had some of the most boring routes to date, which were literally just almost straight lines with some patches of grass to find some Pokemon and nothing else to really do. But that's not really fair. This is where they started that weird trend of having an NPC going find the trainers 3 and you can battle me, or whatever amount they ask for. So you're kind of forced to sort of explore these routes, find every trainer, and then go back to battle that specific NPC for a reward. But oftentimes it wasn't really worth it. And I find this kind of forced exploration, I like to call it, of these routes just very mundane, and honestly wanting to go around and find all these trainers and stuff always was just optional, just kind of part of the experience. So you always just kind of wanted to do it, but this felt like for the first time you were forced to. I think the best way I can just put it is that battling trainers was always just an accessory to a route, not the entire personality of it. And speaking of personality of routes, they all just look so much the same. Hell, in Gen 3, we had actual soot and ash raining and snowing down. I forget which route it was, but the one on the way to Fall Arbor, I believe. And just, we couldn't get that back in the one main volcano route. Really, that's something you just couldn't be bothered to do. That would have been awesome. Although, to be fair, the volcano itself, pretty rad. I did like traversing it. There definitely could have been more to it, but it was one of the better parts of Gen 7. But still, I digress. They could have easily done something like that from 4 gens ago, but I don't know what they were thinking. And then a quick aside, as a man who loves his Gen 2 Lighthouse and lighthouses in general, I take it very personally when I say the lighthouse in Coney Island is a fucking lie. How hard is it to make this an actual piece of content? When I first walked into the town, it seemed like a very large focal point, that maybe they had something planned for it, but it seemed like a big deal at the time. So I immediately ran over, and it's very apparent that it wasn't meant to be, because there's this barricade in front of it that prevents you from going in. And honestly, it's just kind of a theme that repeats throughout a lot of the towns, there's actually only a few buildings you can actually go into. And as I've probably said many times already, this is a theme that's going to get even worse throughout the gens later on. You enjoy your wide variety of environments and unique design of caves in Gen 5, and then for the few that were pretty cool like Reflection Cave in Gen 6, well, that's over and done with, because Gen 7 decided to stop giving a fuck, because all the caves look the exact same and the only real difference is the pathing inside them, which I guess is something, but still, this is kind of where they started giving up on caves. And I don't think you can really consider the Tapu shrines as caves. They kind of tried to make them such, but it's pretty much just a straight shot in each of these shrines with like some half-ass attempt at a puzzle stopping you from the next door, which honestly, this was so low effort, they could have easily just had the Tapu standing outside of these shrines with a Pokeball in hand just waiting for you to catch them. You couldn't even be bothered to make a memorable and unique area for these legendary Pokemon when you excelled at it for so long in the previous gens. Kind of just tells me that I shouldn't give a shit about these Pokemon anyway. And then when they do manage to make some towns look interesting and full of life, they're only limited to a couple of buildings. Like, how am I supposed to have a rootin' tootin' hoedown in Paniyola Town if there's no access to a saloon? I actually did buy a cowboy hat for this bit. I was gonna wear it just for that one sentence, but then it got delayed, and it wasn't gonna get here for like another month. And now I'm sad, and I thought you should know. And then when they do hit just the right points in every single bit of criteria for a great town, you have things like Seafolk Village, which is such a cool concept. It's an entire floating town made of boats. They're just repurposed with a big old tree in the center. Somehow, I don't know how that makes sense, but it just works. And the only real thing holding it back is that there's absolutely nothing to do in this town, which is just putting in that last stretch of effort would have really made this one of the best towns you've ever designed. And speaking of pleasing to look at with nothing to do, O-Town enjoyers, where you at? I'm just very disappointed that this time around they couldn't really bother to make a very thorough enemy team base hideout thing. In so many of the previous games, you know, the hideout was like a big deal. There's usually a lot of content, a lot of trainers to battle, and so many amazing items to obtain. And this time around, it's just one building with, you know, a few battles. You just get like the Bugnium Z thing from Guzma, and that's like it. Which, I mean, you could, I guess, kind of argue that, well, since Aether Foundation is the main villain of the team, and they kind of had a thorough hideout, they didn't have to do this for Team Skull. And, you know, Team Skull's gimmick is all about half-assing it and things like that. But that's just giving Game Freak too much credit. They absolutely should have put in way more effort into Po Town. It's honestly a really well-designed town, just aesthetically. But such a shame there's nothing to do in it. And speaking of things that are sad and empty, Gen 8, why is your map designed with the punctuation of an over-enthusiastic email? You get it? Because over-enthusiastic emails have a lot of exclamation marks, and an exclamation mark is just line and circle, and the map and the routes, they're just lines and circles. You get it? Please send help. I've been stuck in the wild area for 2 weeks looking for content. Gen 8 dared to ask the question, can our map and route design be any worse than Gen 7? And you bet your sweet bippy they can be. I refuse to believe that the wild area itself wasn't some kind of social experiment. Like, they were just spitballing in a board meeting. Like, wouldn't it be funny if we dropped frames in the main area that we're like advertising, in the main focal point of our region, and, you know, just give it a feature like some semi-free camera that's been available since the 90s, and increase the price to $60? And they just all look at the guy like, surely nobody's stupid enough to buy that, right? But plenty of people were stupid enough to buy that, myself included. I bought a copy of each game twice, and I hope you like real fake doors, because this game is full of them. Like, the average town outside of Pokemon centers, the gym, and the same copy pasted like regular shops, like clothing and stuff, there are maybe like 3 buildings you could ever enter at a time on average, which is criminal because a lot of these towns actually looked really beautiful. There's absolutely nothing to do in them. And my God, they had the audacity to commit Lighthouse fraud yet again, which this time is even more egregious because there's a fucking dude up there who's just not even looking at you because you're not good enough to get up there. Please teach me your ways, you smug bastard. Not even the NPCs seem to give a shit about their own homes, because none of them really say anything interesting or of value about the world, the lore, or anything. They're kind of just there because they have to be. Hell, they didn't even bother with cave design or names this time around. You just got your Galar Mine 1, and then Galar Mine 2, and then Route 9 Tunnel, because it's next to Route 9. But honestly, credit where it's due. Wimwood Tangle, absolute banger of a route. It's so pretty to look at, and it has some pretty cool environment interaction where you just hit these mushrooms and they'll illuminate your path. But hey, I'm sure they sacrificed all the map design and content for these routes and towns just to put it all in the focal point of the game, the wild area, right? Like, surely this vast and open world with overworld Pokemon for the first time and dens and various structures to explore and free camera was worth it, right? Well, it would have been had there actually been content. I remember the first time entering the wild area and seeing the big old spoopy tower in the distance by Watchtower Ruins. So I immediately booked it there and got wiped by that Onyx at the beginning because it didn't render in time, and I just fucking smacked into it. And then I wiped. But the second time I booked it immediately to the tower, due to avoid this general area of a late to spawn Onyx. And then when I got there, I see this big old, like hole, this looked like an entrance to this tower. And as I approached it, like there's not even an invisible wall. It just text pops up straight up telling you, there's nothing here. Just idiot. Why'd you bother? You really thought there was something here? Aren't you stupid? Get the hell out of here. Like, how cool would it have been if this tower like had actual content and like trainers that you could fight floor by floor and just have some awesome cool rare Pokemon at the end or some nice items. Or if you didn't want to go that route right off the bat, you could have just like made it a barren area and then this tower just magically shows up like at the end of the game after you've done some kind of achievement, kind of like Turnback Cave. But no, they couldn't even be bothered with that. The whole theme of this game is kind of just, hey, here's some cool looking things that look like their content, but no, you can't go in. Don't even try. There's nothing. But it's the thought that counts, right? It looks good. That's enough, right? Like, the whole game and world in general is just so lifeless. And the overworld Pokemon don't do well to help that. Like, they all just walk around and don't really interact with each other. They kind of just stare at you if you get close enough, and they either just stand there, run away, or square up. There's no really in between. And like, how awesome would it have been to just have like Zangoose and Survivor having a gang war and just beating the shit out of each other just randomly. They could have also done this with like Tyranitar and Duraludon, or however the hell you pronounce it, where it's like stated they have like this big rivalry. They kind of just move around like big old idiots. Like, any effort like that could have just easily made the wild area so much better. But like, overall, as I said, the theme is just pretty to look at, no real substance. But surely Gen 9 could do no worse, right? Well, Scarlet and Violet recently dropped, and they at least showed there are more than 2 shapes in Game Freak's repertoire when it comes to designing an overworld. So there's that. However, the towns suffer even more somehow than the previous gen. The gyms themselves aren't even really gyms anymore. They're just the same corporate headquarters looking building with a lobby inside, and then you just have the actual battle somewhere in the town, and that's it. Hell, one of the towns doesn't even have any homes in it. It's literally just the corporate gym itself and a battle area. Like, that's how you know the crunch time was terrible for these games. But fear not, because this time Game Freak found a solution to the real fake doors problem, and it's doormats. I'm not joking. They copy pasted the same doormat in front of buildings to let you know as an indicator that these can be entered. So I mean, at least I guess there's that. But just like before, there's a lot of empty houses and buildings you can't even enter. but at least you kind of know ahead of time instead of wasting your time bumping into these doors that don't open, I guess. So maybe that's a win. Remember that like route mechanic in Gen 7 where if you beat a certain number of trainers you could battle the main NPC and then you get something? Well, that's kind of back in this gen, except it's just a certain number of trainers, not all of them in a route. And then some of the rewards are pretty worth it, like the TM for Earthquake. But these trainers kind of just add to the lifelessness of the world because they're kind of just scattered about randomly. And the only way to know that you've battled them before is that they have like weird speech bubbles above their heads. So once you beat them, they kind of just go away and they stand there silently for the rest of their lives, just staring into space. But hey, you know, speedrunners, you can at least rejoice because now is the land of consent. So trainers won't just battle you if you accidentally like stand in front of them. You actually have to talk to them to battle. With that aside, let's get a closer look at the overworld as a whole. Is it better than Gen 8? Holy shit, yes, absolutely. I am so glad they didn't figure out a way to make it any worse. However, goddamn, is it still lifeless as shit? And the graphics are somehow just as, if not even worse than Gen 8. Don't get me wrong, I had a blast exploring areas like the cave near Alfrenada. You know, there's multiple levels, the nooks and crannies, but then you quickly realize that this design's kind of recycled all throughout the world. So this was like my first experience with this cave, and then it quickly deteriorated the more caves I explored, which, you know, it's kind of sad that a consequence of exploring more of the world kind of takes away from it. But there are some other cool cavern designs, like in West Province Area 2 near Medali. There's like this cavern-like structure that protrudes from the area and has these stone-like pillars that you can finesse and parkour your way around and eventually get fucked by a Terra Garchomp because it rendered in too late like I did. Actually, to be fair, it might have rendered in just fine because I was half paying attention, but it's easier for my ego to blame the video game, so we're going to go with that. The wide open ocean areas and waterways like Castleroya Lake are pretty serene and nice to explore. That is until it remotely starts raining, or there's a little too many Pokemon that spawn in, and you get frame dips that lower your freaking surf speed to the point that it rivals Gen 4. But not to mention, if you're a really unlucky human being and you get that on top of a mass outbreak of Gyarados, then you better be prepared to buy a new Switch, because that bad boy is going to be joining the ever beautiful Satoru Iwata. God rest his soul. And once again, there is no Victory Road, which this time I find incredibly humorous because the name of the storyline for beating all the gyms and the Elite Four is called Victory Road. Maybe the real Victory Road is the friends we made along the way. And this time around, we have Mezagoza as your hub city, which just looks awful at certain distances, I'm gonna be real honest with you. And I just tend to stay away from towns in general, not just because they lack content or anything like that, but because genuinely I feel bad for the NPCs that are locked in the 2 frame per second purgatory because they're more than 5 centimeters away from me. And the areas with the enemy team's bases are all just copy and pasted and have no real originality to them. And there's like nothing to do in them and nobody to really interact with. All you do is just walk in, commit murder with the new Let's Go feature they introduced, battle the admin, and then leave. You don't really get anything of value for exploring or clearing these bases. And for some reason, the banners at the entrance are all at like different resolutions somehow, and it's really confusing and a bit concerning. I won't even touch on the last storyline because it doesn't really add much value to the topic at hand, but it easily is the best one plot-wise and features my favorite character in this gen. But once you do finish Arvin's storyline, you gain access to the professor's lab near the beginning of the game, and you can tell all the budget and effort somehow went into this goddamn room. It's like, holy shit, it had no business looking as good as it did, and it just threw me off so bad that I was just confused why this was the one area they decided to put all the budget and effort into. But man, let me tell you about that Area Zero. For a game in itself that's just so empty and lifeless, this specific area, kind of the point, and it does it really, really well. Like graphically, it looks just as bad as the rest of the game, but this area is just so massive, and you know, with the lore behind it, like it being untouched and you just don't know what's running amok, just really adds to the intimidation factor of how big and empty it is. And the music really sets the tone as well. And you just know that the further and deeper you go, like the worse it's gonna get. but man, does the presentation do a really good job in and of itself, making use of the whole emptiness and theme of it. And at this point, you should know how much of a sucker I am for caves. And man, ooh, does the cave at the bottom of Area Zero really hit all the right points for me. Like, sure, there's, I would have liked there to be more content to it, but just aesthetically and thematically, this is one of my favorite caves. And it's definitely the best one in the entire game. I mean, it's no contest. But then you have those quartet of legendaries that are locked behind 4 different vaults throughout the world, and each of them can only be opened by picking up 8 stakes per vault, making for a total of 32. And these stakes are scattered randomly throughout the world, so it's kind of a nice way of developing interest to explore it and then rewarding people for exploring the world. And I mean, I'm just glad they were able to add a little bit of something in the little time they had, other than just battling trainers throughout the world. So that being said, at the end of the day, the whole stake collecting was just a cheap hunt-a-thon. I didn't really develop any more interest than the beginning of the game in terms of exploration, because everything was just kind of copied and pasted. That, the whole world itself could just be summarized as, you've seen it once, you've seen it all. So the fact that I was just going around just to open these vaults and not because I had any actual interest in exploring the world kind of says a lot. And it's really hard trying to come up with a solution for the franchise as of late. I mean, you can easily blame the problem on the shift to 3D, but honestly, X and Y kind of disprove that. They show you can still have some great environments and interactions and world building, even though like the shift from 2D to 3D was probably a logistical nightmare. Well, then what about the time crunch? Well, yeah, that could be it, but that's not something that can easily be solved. I mean, Pokemon is very much suffering from its success, and you can't simply push back the game because it ties into so much, and the games themselves are like the main introduction to a new generation. You can't just start releasing, anime, merchandise, spin-offs, TCG sets, without letting people get introduced to the generation itself first, and the games are kind of the pinnacle of doing that. And that's just kind of how it generates all the hype and buzz for the rest of the releases. So to push back the game would have to be pushing back all these things, and that's just a whole other nightmare in of itself. But then also, to that point, it's just as easy to blame the consumer as it is the developers, because the sales numbers aren't stopping. They're actually going up with every gen as of late, even though all these problems exist. So, there's no real incentive to stop these newer, poorer quality games if they're just going to make money anyway. I guess all we can really do is hope Game Freak figures out a way to balance this. But maybe this new era of Pokemon isn't for veterans who are used to a certain quality. And don't get me wrong, if you legitimately enjoy the 3D era, you shouldn't feel ashamed of that. But personally, I think I've kind of just come to accept that no new main series game is going to give me the same spark and joy as I have enjoyed through gens 1 through 5. Personally, I will always love this franchise because it was legitimately my first experience into gaming, and it just holds a special place in my heart. But it doesn't mean me or the countless other number of veterans that are just tired of these poor quality games have to continually support it. And these newer games don't really affect the legacies of the older ones. I mean, they're always going to be there, and I can just go back and replay them whenever I get that nostalgic itch. And with so many great fan-made games that are revitalizing older titles or even fixing and making the newer ones even better, I think I can at least accept this compromise. And I know it might seem like they've stopped caring, but Game Freak has shown very small signs of life here and there. I don't believe they've stopped caring. I just hope someday they can figure these issues out and deliver a game of their previous caliber in the 2D era.